She had always been a whisper in the room, a presence so quiet and unassuming that people often forgot she was there. Her name was Ilara, and she was a cartographer for a specialized government agency, a job that suited her temperament perfectly. She spent her days amidst maps and satellite imagery, finding solace in the silent language of topography and coordinates. Her world was one of precision, of lines and angles, a world she could control from her small, orderly desk. And the noise and chaos of the human world, the politics and the petty power struggles, held no interest for her. She was content in her quiet competence. That quiet competence was about to be shattered. The briefing room was filled with the usual suspects: military brass in crisp uniforms, intelligence analysts with worried eyes, and a handful of operators who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. The target was a high-value individual, a terrorist financier known as the Accountant, who had burrowed deep into a lawless region of the Sahara. He moved constantly, surrounded by a cadre of loyal guards, and was reportedly in possession of surface-to-air missiles that were about to change the balance of power in the region. The mission was simple in concept, impossible in execution: a single, surgically precise shot from an inconceivable distance. And the only viable firing position was a rocky outcrop nearly 2 miles from the compound where the Accountant was expected to appear for a meeting. Every sniper in the room, all men with years of combat experience and legendary reputations, shook their heads. The distance, combined with the unpredictable thermal winds of the desert, made the shot a statistical improbability. It was a suicide mission, not a tactical one. Then, an analyst from the back of the room spoke up. And he mentioned the cartographer. He mentioned her obsessive hobby, a family heirloom she had spoken of once years ago. It was a long shot, he said, but she could put a bullet through a coin at 500 yards with a rifle that had no business being that accurate. The room fell silent, then erupted in skeptical laughter. A cartographer? A vintage rifle? It was absurd. But the mission was on the verge of being scrapped, and the CIA station chief, a woman named Ava, was desperate, and she was the one who went to find Ilara. Ilara was in her office, tracing the contours of a mountain range, when Ava walked in. The proposal was laid out, stark and terrifying. Ilara listened without a word, her face a placid mask. She was shown the satellite imagery, the estimated wind speeds, the distance. She looked at the data, the raw numbers that told a story of impossibility. Then, in her soft, quiet voice, she said, "The angle is wrong. From this position, there's a thermal updraft from the wadi here that will skew the shot by at least 6 inches at that range." She pointed to a dry riverbed on the map that the military experts had missed. She was seeing the world not as a battlefield, but as a map. And on a map, everything was just a problem to be solved. Her acceptance of the mission was not born of patriotism or a thirst for glory. It was a purely intellectual challenge. The world had given her a puzzle of impossible complexity, and she had to see if she could solve it. They gave her the vintage rifle, a family heirloom she had inherited from a grandfather she never met. It was a long-barreled bolt-action rifle, its wooden stock worn smooth by time. It was a beautiful, elegant piece of engineering from a bygone era, but it was a dinosaur compared to the space-age technology the SEALs used. It had a simple, fixed iron sight, no scope, no laser rangefinder, just a V of metal and a post at the end of the barrel. It was an insult dressed up as an opportunity. The Navy SEAL sniper, a hulking man named Marcus, who had been assigned to be her spotter, looked at the rifle with undisguised contempt. "This is a joke, right?" he grumbled. "We're supposed to do this with a museum piece?" Ilara didn't argue. She simply took the rifle, broke it down, and began to clean it with a reverence that bordered on the spiritual. She ran her fingers along the barrel, feeling for any imperfections. And she examined the firing pin, the action, the stock. She knew this rifle. not from experience, but from 100 hours of research. She knew its history, its quirks, its soul. To Marcus, it was a relic. To Ilara, it was a partner. The training began in the scorching heat of a Nevada desert that was meant to mimic the Sahara. Marcus, a man who had made kills at a mile with his custom .338 Lapua, tried to teach her his methods. He talked about wind speed, Coriolis effect, and using complex algorithms to calculate bullet drop. He showed her his spotter's scope, a device that could read the mirage and give him real-time data. Ilara listened politely, then ignored him. She wasn't interested in his technology. She was interested in the feel of the wind on her skin, the way the heat shimmered off the rocks, the subtle shift in light as the sun moved across the sky. She spent the first 2 days doing nothing but lying in the prone position, staring at the target through the iron sights and feeling. The first time she fired, Marcus almost laughed. She missed the target by a mile. The second time, she was closer. By the end of the first week, she was consistently hitting a man-sized silhouette at 1,500 yards, a feat that made Marcus's jaw drop. He couldn't understand it. He was watching her through his high-powered scope, seeing the same data he always saw, but her process was alien to him. She wasn't calculating. She was becoming one with the environment. "How?" he asked her one evening, his voice stripped of its earlier arrogance. She was cleaning the rifle, her movements slow and deliberate. "The rifle is just an extension," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "You have to feel the air, not measure it. You have to become the bullet, and let the wind decide where you'll land." The day of the mission arrived. They were inserted by a special ops helicopter under the cover of darkness. I dropped miles from the target to avoid detection. Ilara, carrying the vintage rifle in a canvas bag, and Marcus, laden with a pack full of communication gear and his own useless rifle, moved through the pre-dawn desert like two ghosts. They reached the outcrop, a jagged spine of rock that overlooked the wadi and the squat mud brick compound beyond. Marcus set up his position, his scope trained on the target area. Ilara found her place, a small, uncomfortable depression in the rock. She laid down, the worn wooden stock settling against her cheek like it had been made for her. The sun rose, painting the desert in hues of orange and gold. The heat began to build, and the air started to dance with shimmering waves of mirage. Through his scope, Marcus could see the compound, the guards changing shifts, the dust devils swirling in the wadi. He could see the data, the wind speed fluctuating wildly. "This is a nightmare," he whispered into his mic. "My thermals are all over the place. The window will be a fraction of a second." Ilara didn't respond. Her world had shrunk to the small V of her rear sight, the post at the end of the barrel, and the vague shape of a doorway almost 2 miles away. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, baking them in their positions. Marcus's back screamed in agony, but Ilara seemed carved from the rock itself, perfectly still. Then, at noon, the compound gates opened. A convoy of dusty Toyota trucks roared in. The men got out. Marcus's heart hammered against his ribs. "Target is in the vicinity. I see movement in the courtyard. A man in a white robe. That's him. He's talking to another man. They're walking towards the main building. Ilara, do you have him?" Ilara saw nothing but a blur. Through the iron sights, the man was a tiny, indistinct speck, a dark mote against the sun-blasted wall. She couldn't see his face, couldn't confirm his identity. She could only see his movement, the way he walked. It was the same gait she had studied in the drone footage for days. It was him. But he was moving, and he was about to disappear inside. "Wind's shifting," she murmured. "East-northeast, gusting." Marcus frantically checked his instruments. "My data says the same, but at this range, with that gust, Ilara, it's impossible. The variables are too high. We need to abort." The man in the white robe was 10 feet from the doorway. In 2 seconds, he would be gone. The mission would be a failure, and the missiles would be sold. Countless lives would be lost. Ilara took a breath, not a deep, calming breath, but a slow, deliberate sip of air. She stopped thinking about distance, about wind, about the man. She focused only on the post in her sight, the blurry target beyond it, and the almost imperceptible pressure of the trigger against her fingertip. She felt the gust of wind coming before it arrived, a subtle shift in the pressure on her skin. She corrected, not with a calculation, but with a feeling, a minute adjustment of her body that moved the point of aim by a hair's breadth. She fired. The crack of the vintage rifle was shockingly loud in the silent expanse. The bullet, a piece of antiquated lead, began its 2-mile journey. For a second, it was a part of Ilara, a piece of her will sent screaming across the void. Then it was gone, on its own. Marcus watched through his scope, his breath held. He saw the bullet's path, so visible only as a faint disturbance in the air. He saw it intersect with the man in the white robe at the exact moment he was stepping through the doorway. The man crumpled, a puppet with its strings cut. Pandemonium erupted in the compound. Guards scrambled, shouting, pointing at nothing. They had no idea where the shot had come from. Marcus stared, his mind refusing to process what his eyes had just seen. A 2-mile shot, with a vintage rifle, with iron sights, in gusting wind. It was statistically impossible. It was a miracle. He looked over at Ilara. She was already on her knees, carefully breaking down the rifle, her face pale and drawn. There was no triumph in her eyes, no joy, only a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. She had solved the puzzle. The cost of the solution was a human life, but that was an abstraction, a number on a map. For her, the mission was over. The quiet was about to return. The extraction was a blur of noise and adrenaline. The helicopter swooped in, kicking up a storm of sand. Marcus practically had to drag Ilara on board. As they lifted off, the compound shrinking below them, the other operators on the helicopter stared at the quiet woman and the ancient rifle in her lap. They had heard the chatter. They knew what she had done. One of them, a young comms specialist, leaned over and shouted above the rotor noise, "That was the most insane thing I've ever seen. How did you do it?" Ilara looked at him, and her eyes still distant, still seeing that tiny speck through the V of her sight. She didn't answer. She simply looked down at the rifle in her hands, running her thumb along the smooth, worn stock. The question wasn't how she had done it. The question was why the world had given her such a problem to solve in the first place. They had given her just a vintage rifle, a piece of the past. But in the silent language of the desert, with only the wind as her guide, she had proven that a quiet mind and a steady hand could still speak louder than any machine. The world would never know her name. Her story would be sealed in a classified file, a footnote in a history book no one would read. But for the rest of his life, Marcus would see her in his dreams, a still point in a turning world, the ghost with the vintage rifle who became the wind.